Hey everybody, here we are going into the last full week of the term and the next to last week of the term. So if you remember, just last week, we split the motivation chapter into two parts, and I took 2 weeks to do that, which kind of messed up the schedule from the syllabus just a little bit. And so we're using change and culture for the Sunday reflections. And so chapter 12 is will be on tap this week. And because it's so big, this is one of those, like I said, I really kind of hate to go just through PowerPoints, but this chapter has so much in it. This was actually a whole course in grad school. We spent a whole semester just going over organizational theory. So the reason I like this book is because it goes along with the title of the course, which is Organizational Behavior and Theory. So really this stuff tonight is going to be that classic org theory stuff. Here are the learning objectives. So I left this one in this week, and really what I'd like to do tonight, I'm going to break this in half, otherwise it's going to be too big, which would be unpleasant for all of us. So really I want to go through these first two tonight. So I'll load this up for Sunday, and then on Monday I'll come back and load up these other two just to break it up a little bit so we can get through all this material. So here we go. Again, just good old classic org theory. And I'd assume that most of you, if not all of you, have had a management class before. And this is just one of those kind of classic topics that's going to be in every single management textbook, whether it's an org theory book or just kind of a principles of management. So I think this will be a lot of review for most of you. So I'm going to go through a little faster also because you have the book and can go back and find the support material. So we're going to look at kind of what is structure and look at this coordination. And then we're going to look at these kind of core elements of org theory. And then we'll come back next time and do the departmentalization and then the influence of the environment and technology and size. All right, so definition right here, organizational structure. Also, if you remember back when I introduced Adam Smith stuff at the beginning, Fred Taylor stuff, and said really until the Hawthorne studies, basically management theory was kind of economic theory and it was organization theory. So it wasn't until, kind of the Hawthorne studies, the Western Electric studies, that all of a sudden we started to bring in people and what that meant to realize that organizations are full of people. So structure, again, kind of that classic stuff, division of labor, patterns of coordination, communication, workflow, and formal power. Now we hit power in the leadership class, but not so much in here. Formal powers, the authority vested in the position. And maybe you're a leader and maybe there's some other special stuff that your followers attribute and give to you, or maybe it's just that formal authority. So really with this one, they're talking about formal power, formal authority that direct the activities within the organization. So when your organization is just a pattern and series of activities that occur that are goal directed. Also, one more thing, kind of tying it back to org behavior, is when you look at open systems theory, which we mentioned, and you look at the characteristics of an open system, differentiation and integration. So as organizations differentiate themselves, there needs to be something to coordinate and integrate all of them. Okay, so that's what this is talking about, those patterns of coordination and then how we divide up the work. Okay, that's kind of the division, but then we have to have something to organize it. So that's what this next section is right here. So division of labor and coordination. Again, it goes right back to that idea of systems theory from the sciences. But again, as management people, leadership, organizational people, we see that the definition of a system and the definition of an organization are very similar. And so we were able to borrow those. So some of those key ideas, again, going right back to Adam Smith, going right back to Fred Taylor, is divide up the work. And you divide it up, it results in specialization. And the jobs are different for different people. We saw that's nothing new. Classic management theory, and it improves efficiency. We've already seen it. That's where we started this semester. Okay, with that, then you have to coordinate it. So if you divide it and everybody's doing these different things, there has to be something to coordinate and make sure that it's all working together. Think about a conductor with an orchestra. The conductor is the one who has to keep everybody together, and if they start getting off, to be able to pull them back together so they're all working together. So these are three mechanisms that the book points out. the informal communication, the hierarchy and the way that you define jobs and power and responsibility, and then standardization. So let's pull those apart real quick. Okay, informal communication. So you got the formal communication that flows through an organization, but you've also got the informal, people talking to each other verbally through meetings, informal meetings, through email, just through conversation. So those are more the informal, used in all firms, violent, non-routine and ambiguous. So you don't exactly know what to do, or this is uncertain, or exactly what are the rules, or what are we supposed to be doing here. That you're able to communicate informally and don't have to go through a formal channel to be able to communicate. Okay, larger firms also have some of these integrator roles and other things that are specific to allow for proper communication to go. Okay, so one of the ways we communicate is through informal communication. All right, and then this next one. So the formal hierarchy, with the formal hierarchy, I think would come more formal communication. So with the formal hierarchy, that's going to be the supervision. Henry Fail, who is one of our classic management theorists, he was real big on specifying the importance of the hierarchy and the scalar chain of command and how information flows and how you report. So that's what this is. So the way you structure the organization, you write up the responsibilities and the roles, and who's going to report to who and how is information going to flow. That formal hierarchy also gives the ability to coordinate and to integrate across those things. And then lastly is standardization. Again, one of those classical management theory concepts. The process standardized. The processes such as job descriptions, other things are standardized. We write them the same way. The outputs and the things that are expected across the organization are standardized, and then the skills that we train for. So those are just some of those, but standardization means you're doing the same thing. You're doing this, following a standard. Everybody's kind of expected to understand how to do something in particular in one way. Okay, so these are what they call the coordinating mechanisms that are used to make sense and keep the whole organization together when you divide up the work. So divide the work, but then you have to coordinate. So they talk about informal, they talk about communication, formal hierarchy, and then standardization. Okay, so that's kind of setting the stage. And then we jump into these pieces here. These are kind of the core elements of organizational theory. And really standardization, I've seen, would usually be one of those in there as well. Okay, so departmentalization, span of control, formalization, and centralization. And let's pull those apart. So we're just going to kind of define these. And then, like I said, in my next lecture, in my next talk, we'll go on and do the second two learning objectives from the chapter. So let's make sense of these. Okay, so span of control, probably not a new concept to you all. This has to do with reporting relationships. So how many people report to a supervisor, a manager, whatever that person's called. Wide span of control is that one person is going to have many people that report. A narrow span of control is going to have fewer people. And some of these things, well, when do you want wide? When do you want narrow? There are a lot of contingencies. It just depends on a lot of these. So on this one, it says the wider span, meaning that there's kind of one supervisor overseeing many people. They do it when you have some of these other coordinating mechanisms present. We almost call it a substitute for leadership, substitute for management. So when you do have those strong coordinating mechanisms, then the person in charge can oversee more people, because the standardization takes care of some of those responsibilities that the manager, the one in charge, would normally have to take care of. When the tasks are routine, also in the leadership area, we call it a substitute for leadership. By doing the same thing that's very well defined and it's routine, there are not a lot of questions. And so if there are not a lot of questions and everybody gets in and gets to work, you can have more people report to a single coordinator because the task helps take care of a lot of the questions that might arise. And then last one is low employee interdependence. When we talk about Thompson, this is more like a gymnastics team or a bowling team, where you add up the scores of the individual members of the team, unlike a basketball team. where there is a lot of interdependence with the basketball team. So if everybody's kind of pooled, kind of doing their own thing, and they're doing a routine task, and when all these other things already exist, then there's not as much coordination between the people, and so everybody's kind of standalone, and you can have more people doing their own jobs, and then the supervisor can work with those individually when an issue arises. All right, so again, classic org theory, and a theory is an explanation for how things work, grounded in the empirical or scientific method. And so span of control can be wide, can be narrow, and it has to do with number of reporting relationships to a supervisor or a manager or whatever you call that person in charge with the authority. This one kind of goes back to that. So if you have a wide span of control, then the organization is going to be flat. Okay, if you think about kind of a tread on a tank, okay, it's nice and wide, and it's able to roll, so it's wide, it's going to be relatively flat. Versus a tall organization, when you have a big organization with a narrow span of control, for every 3, you're going to have a supervisor, okay, and then for every 3 supervisors, you have to have another supervisor. All of a sudden, it's going to get really tall as the organization becomes bigger. So let's talk about it. As companies grow, they build taller. That also goes back to Parkinson's law. They widen the span or both. Okay, as they become bigger, they're either going to become taller, or they're going to become wider, or a combination. The problems with the tall. Okay, so with the tall, poor upward information. It tends to come downward. Okay, when you're flat, you can communicate easily with the one in charge. But if you have multiple levels, it's going to be harder to get up and then come back down. Higher overhead costs just with the number of people, and then it undermines the empowerment or engagement. We're kind of falling back into classic org theory, what we saw from 100 years ago in those big organizations. All right, so as they become bigger, what we want to do is talk about centralization. Centralization and decentralization. Again, classic org theory concept. Maybe not the most exciting, but it's like those Kia Souls. Once you're aware of it, then you can start making sense of the world around you. Okay, so centralization has to do where is the decision-making vested. And if you're a centralized organization, it says that decision-making is going to be held by a few people. It's centralized. All the decisions are coming out of a central location, if that helps you remember it. So a few people, and it said usually at the top, which is kind of classical way of thinking about that. But as organizations become bigger, you can't possibly send all the questions up and to the centralized group of decision maker. The decision making has to be pushed down. It has to become more decentralized. You have to trust and empower and let the people at lower levels be able to make some of those decisions. Okay, so decentralization increases as company grows. And then this one, there are going to be different levels of centralization in different areas. So here's the example that they use. In production, they say most of that decision making is going to come out of middle management. Where in IT, most of it is going to come out of the top. And then on this one, on sales, most of it's going to come down from the people who are interacting with the clients. Okay, so that one, there are varying degrees of centralization in different areas of the company. Okay, so centralization, decentralization. Formalization, okay, and again, we're going to come back and put kind of contingencies. When are these appropriate? We'll make sense of it when we talk about size and technology and the environment. Okay, so that'll be in the second half, the back half of this chapter. All right, so formalization has to do with the written procedures. So formalized organizations, they write everything down, and that goes back to standardization. So formalization, standardization, you tend to hear those things together. So standardizing behavior through these written rules, procedures, and training. It's formal, okay? It's standardized, it's written. Okay, so this one, older, larger, regulated firms tend to have more formalization. Ones with a lot of people that keep coming in and keep doing kind of the same roles over and over again, we write it all down. And we also have to write down the reporting relationships. And we have to write down how the work is done because it's big and we need to be able to stick people in division of labor. Okay, so the problems, obviously it's good in that kind of like Max Weber talking about bureaucracy. This helps with big organizations, but it also has problems. Okay, so it brings about inflexibility. Well, I need an exception. Well, the rules say you have to do it this way. Yes, but that can create inflexibility. Discourages creativity and learning. Okay, these are the rules. You can't step outside of them. This is how we do stuff. Less work efficiency because we've got to follow the rules sometimes. It can increase dissatisfaction, and it can also increase stress. And then right here, rules and procedures become the focus of attention rather than the work. Okay, so if you've ever been in an organization where maybe there are a lot of rules, or maybe someone who's come in and put in a lot of rules, now all of a sudden I'm having to worry about all of the paperwork and all of the approval and all of these other things that have to be done, that is distracting from my ability to step out and do what I need to do. And not that I'm speaking from experience, but I am. All right, and then lastly, this is where we'll end today. I think this will probably be enough for tonight. Mechanistic and organic. This is Burns and Stalker. This is just good old classic org theory. Mechanistic structures. These are going to be your tall organizations that are machine-like. Okay, so in big organizations that have very standardized way of doing things in a predictable environment, and they need to be efficient, that's when we tend to be mechanistic. We turn ourselves into a big, efficient machine. Okay, so narrow span of control, high centralization, high formalization. So if you jump back to those videos that we started off the term with, from Henry Ford's factory and from a lot of those kind of classic production factories, what you see are mechanistic, machine-like. Remember we talked about systems and Kenneth Boulding? This is the machine-like metaphor for how you design organizations. And then with Boulding, we jumped up to that metaphor that it's lifelike. Also talks about that with systems theory, closed systems, okay, like framework and clockwork, and then cybernetic and control was up here too. But then we made that jump up to the life versus the biological systems, and they're adaptable and they can change. Okay, so with organic structures, these are built for adaptability and change. These are built for efficiency and stability. So which is better? It depends. It depends. And we'll come back and put some more of those on there in this next talk. Okay, so they're organic or the adaptable. They're decentralized decisions, low formalization. So we all know what to do. We're able to adapt and react and change really quickly. And in some cases, that's what's needed. In other cases, this is what's needed. We need to be efficient. We're really big. We're really concentrating on efficiency. We're operating in a stable, known environment. Everything's stable and predictable. This makes more sense to be competitive. When you have a lot of change and things are dynamic, this makes more sense to be competitive. All right, so with that, I'm going to call it right there. This will be the first one, so I'll put this up on Sunday night, and then I'll load up the other half for Monday night. So that's it. Check back later.